The salvage officer watches the pumps at 0800 hours on March 25, 1942. Commander Homer Wallen stands on the deck of USS California as water pours from her hull, 4 months after she sank at Pearl Harbor. The battleship rests on the harbor bottom, listing 5 degrees, her upper decks barely above water, her machinery flooded, her magazines contaminated, her interior a maze of mud and oil. She took 2 torpedoes and a bomb on December 7, 1941, flooding rapidly until she settled onto the bottom with 51 men trapped inside, dead before rescue could reach them. The Navy could scrap her, strip her for parts, or attempt the largest salvage operation in naval history, pumping out thousands of tons of water, patching torpedo holes, refloating a ship that has been underwater for months, then towing her to dry dock for reconstruction. The conventional wisdom is abandonment. California is 22 years old. Her design is obsolete, and resources would be better spent on new construction. But Wallen and his salvage teams are proving that conventional wisdom is wrong. In 2 months, California will float again. In 2 years, she will be completely rebuilt with modern fire control, radar, and anti-aircraft armament. In 3 years, she will bombard Japanese positions at Guam, Leyte, Lingayen Gulf, Okinawa, and the Japanese home islands, firing more ammunition in the final year of war than she fired in the previous 22 years of peacetime service. The Prune Barge, nicknamed for her slow speed and unglamorous pre-war service, will become symbol of American industrial capacity. The resurrection that demonstrated sunken ships could be recovered, obsolete designs could be modernized, and revenge for Pearl Harbor would be delivered by the same battleships Japan thought it had destroyed. USS California was a Tennessee-class battleship, designed during World War I and completed in the early 1920s. The Tennessee-class specifications reflected American battleship design in the immediate post-World War I period. Displacement: 32,300 tons standard, 40,700 tons full load. Length: 624 feet. Beam: 97 feet. Draft: 30 feet. Armament: 12 14-inch 45 caliber guns and 4 triple turrets, 14 5-inch 51 caliber secondary guns, numerous 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. Armor: 14-inch belt, 18-inch turret faces, 3.5-inch deck over magazines. The armor scheme was designed to resist 14-inch shells at battle ranges of 15 to 20,000 yards. Maximum speed: 21 knots, slow even when designed. Range: 8,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. Crew: approximately 2,100. The ships were built for firepower and protection, sacrificing speed for armor and gun power. They were designed for line battle at moderate ranges, where armor would resist enemy shells while 14-inch guns destroyed opposing ships. California was laid down at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in October 1916, launched in November 1919, and commissioned in August 1921. She served with the Pacific Fleet throughout the 1920s and 30s, conducting routine peacetime operations, fleet exercises, gunnery practice, goodwill visits. Her nickname, Prune Barge, came from crew humor about her slow speed and unglamorous duties. Prune growers in California had sponsored her construction, and the ship became associated with the state's agricultural products rather than martial glory. By 1941, California was 20 years old and showing her age. Her machinery was reliable but worn. Her fire control was outdated compared to new battleships. Her anti-aircraft armament was inadequate. She was scheduled for modernization, but the work had been deferred repeatedly as resources went to new construction. She represented the generation of battleships that had served between the wars but were being superseded by faster, more capable designs. On December 7, 1941, California was moored at Pearl Harbor, berth Fox 3 along Battleship Row. She was not in the same concentrated grouping as some battleships, but was still accessible to Japanese torpedo bombers approaching from the southeast. At 0805 hours, the first wave of Japanese aircraft began their attack. At 0808 hours, a torpedo struck California's port side forward, flooding the forward compartments and causing immediate list. The damage control response was immediate. Watertight doors were closed. Counterflooding was ordered to correct the list. Pumps were started to control flooding. But at 0812 hours, a second torpedo struck amidships on the port side, flooding additional compartments and overwhelming damage control efforts. At approximately 0825 hours, a bomb penetrated the deck near the second turret, exploding in the ship's interior and starting fires. Captain Joel Bunkley ordered abandon ship at approximately 0900 hours. The flooding was uncontrollable. The ship was settling. Staying aboard risked additional casualties from continued attacks or from the ship capsizing. The crew evacuated, moving to shore or to other ships, but not everyone escaped. 51 men were trapped below decks, in compartments that flooded too quickly to allow escape. They died from drowning or suffocation as the ship settled. California sank slowly, settling upright on the harbor bottom rather than capsizing. Her upper decks remained above water. This was critical for salvage. An upright ship could be pumped out and refloated more easily than a capsized hull, but she was flooded to her main deck. Her machinery was contaminated with seawater, and her interior was filled with oil and debris. The immediate post-attack assessment concluded California was a total loss. She was too badly damaged to repair in Pearl Harbor. Towing her to the mainland would require extensive work to make her seaworthy enough to survive the voyage, and even if she could be repaired, the question was whether resources should be spent on a 20-year-old battleship when new construction was needed urgently. But several factors argued for salvage. First, California's damage, while extensive, was repairable. The hull structure was intact. The machinery could be cleaned and overhauled. The ship could be refloated and towed to a shipyard with proper facilities. Second, battleships took years to build. California could potentially be returned to service faster than new battleships could be constructed. Third, strategic necessity demanded maximum use of available assets. Every battleship that could be salvaged was a battleship that did not need to be built from scratch. Commander Wallen, assigned to direct salvage operations at Pearl Harbor, assessed California and determined she could be saved. The salvage would be complex but feasible. The work began in January 1942. The first phase was pumping out flooded compartments. This required sealing holes in the hull, closing damaged hatches, and removing water faster than it leaked back in. The torpedo holes were patched with wooden cofferdams, essentially boxes built around the holes and sealed to the hull. Once sealed, the water inside could be pumped out. The process was slow because every compartment had to be pumped individually and inspected to ensure it would hold. The second phase was removing debris and oil. The ship's interior was contaminated with fuel oil, seawater, and silt from the harbor bottom. Everything had to be cleaned or removed before the ship could be considered seaworthy. Crews worked in conditions that were difficult and dangerous: dark flooded spaces, contaminated water, structural damage that made compartments unstable. The third phase was refloating, once enough water was removed. California's natural buoyancy would lift her off the bottom, but this required careful control. If the ship floated unevenly, she might capsize. If compartments still held water, she might sink again. The refloating was scheduled for March 25, 1942. After 3 months of pumping and preparation, at 0800 hours on March 25th, the final pumps engaged. Water levels in the hull dropped. California's weight decreased. At 0930 hours, she lifted off the bottom. At 1000 hours, she was floating, still listing slightly but afloat under her own buoyancy. The salvage had succeeded. The ship that had been underwater for over 3 months was floating again. Temporary repairs made her seaworthy enough for towing. The journey from Pearl Harbor to Puget Sound Navy Yard in Washington began in October 1942. California was towed by ocean-going tugs, the voyage taking 3 weeks through waters where Japanese submarines operated. But she reached Puget Sound safely and entered dry dock for complete reconstruction. The reconstruction was not simple repair but fundamental rebuild. The ship was essentially gutted. The old fire control systems were removed and replaced with modern equipment. The anti-aircraft armament was completely redesigned. The old 3-inch guns were removed and replaced with 16 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns in twin mounts, 40 mm Bofors guns, and over 40 20 mm Oerlikon guns. Radar was installed throughout: air search radar, surface search radar, fire control radar. The superstructure was modified to accommodate the new systems. The machinery was overhauled completely. The boilers were cleaned, inspected, and repaired or replaced as needed. The turbines were disassembled, worn parts replaced, systems tested. The electrical systems were updated. The damage control systems were improved based on lessons learned at Pearl Harbor. when the reconstruction was complete. California was mechanically a new ship in a 25-year-old hull. The cost was substantial. The reconstruction took 2 years and cost over $28 million, nearly as much as building a new destroyer. But the result was a battleship with modern capabilities, ready for combat operations. Available years before new battleship construction could replace her. California rejoined the fleet in January 1944. Her first combat operation was the invasion of the Mariana Islands in June. She provided shore bombardment for the landings at Saipan, her 14-inch guns firing on Japanese positions defending the beaches. The bombardment was effective. The heavy shells destroyed bunkers and fortifications that aircraft bombs could not penetrate. Her fire support continued through the battle, engaging targets identified by shore fire control parties. In October 1944, California participated in the Battle of Surigao Strait, part of the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf. This was the last battleship gun duel in history. American battleships engaging Japanese battleships at night in confined waters. California was part of the battle line that crossed the T on the approaching Japanese force. All American battleships firing broadsides while the Japanese could only engage with forward guns. The engagement demonstrated the advantage of radar fire control. American battleships detected Japanese ships on radar, calculated firing solutions, and opened fire at ranges where visual targeting would have been impossible. California's guns engaged the Japanese battleship Yamashiro, contributing to the destruction that sank her. The entire action lasted less than 20 minutes. The Japanese force was annihilated. American losses were negligible. Surigao Strait was validation of the old battleship's value. Ships designed in World War I, equipped with modern fire control and radar, destroyed a Japanese force in exactly the type of engagement battleships were designed for. The victory was particularly satisfying for the ships sunk at Pearl Harbor and subsequently raised. They had been written off as obsolete. They had proven their continued relevance. California continued operations through 1945. She bombarded positions during the invasion of Lingayen Gulf in the Philippines in January. She supported the Okinawa landings in April, spending months on station providing fire support for ground forces fighting ashore. In July and August, she bombarded the Japanese home islands, her shells striking industrial targets and military installations in preparation for the invasion that never came. The ammunition expenditure told the story of her service. From December 1941 to August 1945, California fired approximately 10,000 rounds of 14-inch ammunition, the vast majority in the final 18 months of war. Each shell weighed over 1,400 pounds. The total weight of ordnance she delivered exceeded 6 million pounds. Every shell represented destruction inflicted on Japanese positions and forces. Contribution to victory measured in tons of high explosive. The human cost of her service included the 51 who died at Pearl Harbor, trapped in compartments that flooded before they could escape. Their bodies were not recovered until the ship was pumped out months later. The salvage crews found them at their stations, some still wearing life jackets. Evidence of desperate attempts to reach safety. The recovery and identification was necessary but grim work, documenting the price of the attack and providing closure for families. Additional casualties occurred during combat operations. Shore bombardment brought occasional return fire from Japanese coastal batteries. Kamikaze attacks threatened all ships off Okinawa. California took near misses but no direct hits, her anti-aircraft batteries proving effective against attacking aircraft. Her crew suffered minimal combat casualties, testament to effective damage control and air defense. The comparison to other Pearl Harbor battleships showed California's reconstruction was representative of broader program. USS West Virginia, sunk at Pearl Harbor, was raised and rebuilt similarly, returning to service in time for Leyte Gulf. USS Tennessee, damaged but not sunk, underwent extensive modernization that transformed her into effective combatant. USS Pennsylvania, in dry dock during the attack and minimally damaged, was modernized and served through the war. USS Nevada, beached after being torpedoed, was refloated, repaired, and participated in D-Day bombardment before transferring to Pacific. The battleships that could not be saved were USS Arizona, destroyed by magazine explosion, and USS Oklahoma, capsized and too badly damaged for economical repair. Arizona remains at Pearl Harbor as memorial. Oklahoma was refloated, stripped, and sold for scrap but sank under tow to the mainland. The 8 battleships present at Pearl Harbor divided into 3 categories: 2 total losses, 1 minimally damaged, 5 salvaged and returned to service. The salvage program demonstrated American industrial capacity and institutional competence. The technical challenges were substantial: pumping ships, patching hulls, rebuilding machinery, all while fighting a 2-ocean war. The resources devoted to salvage might have gone to new construction, but the decision to salvage was vindicated by the results. Battleships returned to service years before new construction could replace them, participating in crucial operations and providing capabilities no other platforms could match. The fire support role became the salvaged battleship's primary mission. Aircraft carriers were decisive in carrier battles, but carriers could not provide sustained heavy gunfire for troops ashore. Cruisers had guns but lacked the armor and firepower of battleships. The 14-inch guns on Tennessee-class ships and 16-inch guns on reconstructed battleships delivered weight of fire that no other asset could provide. Post-war analysis of shore bombardment effectiveness found battleship fire was most valuable against hardened positions, command centers, and concentrated defenses. The heavy shells could penetrate fortifications that resisted bombs. The sustained fire could suppress defenders during landings. The accuracy improved through the war as fire control developed and forward observers learned to direct naval gunfire effectively. California's post-war fate was typical for her generation. She was decommissioned in August 1946, less than a year after the war ended. The Navy had new battleships, no need for 25-year-old designs, and shrinking budgets that made maintaining older ships untenable. She was placed in reserve, officially in mothballs, theoretically available for reactivation but practically obsolete. She remained in reserve through the 1950s. Plans for reactivation during the Korean War were considered and rejected. The Iowa-class battleships were reactivated instead, their speed and more modern design making them more suitable. California and her sisters sat idle, their machinery preserved, their guns silent. In September 1959, California was stricken from the Naval Register and sold for scrap. She was broken up in 1960, her steel recycled, her fittings sold, her identity erased. The ship that had been sunk at Pearl Harbor, raised from the mud, rebuilt completely, and fought through the Pacific Campaign ended as scrap metal. Her service commemorated in histories, but her physical form destroyed. The prune barge nickname faded with her scrapping. The generation that had served aboard her and knew the origins of the name passed. Histories of Pearl Harbor mentioned her sinking and salvage but focused more on Arizona and Oklahoma, the ships that could not be saved. California's story became footnote. Another battleship sunk, another salvaged, served adequately, scrapped after war. The technical miracle of her resurrection was acknowledged but not celebrated. But the technical achievement deserved recognition. Salvaging California required solving problems never before encountered on such scale. Pumping a ship that had been underwater for months, patching torpedo holes while the ship remained on the harbor bottom, refloating without capsizing, towing across ocean to shipyard, completely rebuilding to modern standards. Every phase presented challenges that had to be solved through innovation and persistence. The salvage crews who accomplished this work received minimal recognition. They were not combat veterans in traditional sense. They worked in shipyards and harbors, not on the front lines, but their contribution was essential. Every ship they salvaged was ship that did not need to be built. Every month saved in returning ships to service was month those ships were available for operations. The cumulative impact was substantial. At 0800 hours on March 25, 1942, Commander Wallen watched California lift off the bottom and float again. The moment validated months of work and proved that ships given up as lost could be recovered. The salvage program at Pearl Harbor would eventually raise and return to service 5 battleships, 2 cruisers, and 3 destroyers. The program demonstrated institutional capability that matched combat heroism in importance, even if it received less recognition. USS California's resurrection symbolized American response to Pearl Harbor, absorbing the attack, learning from it, adapting, and returning stronger. The ships Japan thought it had destroyed came back modernized and effective. The Navy that was supposed to be crippled rebuilt faster than enemy anticipated. The industrial capacity that enabled this recovery was fundamental to Allied victory, more important than individual battles or campaigns. The revenge of the older dreadnoughts was not dramatic carrier battle or decisive gun duel, but accumulation of service across years and theaters. California and her sisters provided fire support that enabled amphibious operations. They absorbed attacks meant for more valuable ships. They maintained presence that contributed to overall naval dominance. Their revenge was measured in thousands of shells fired, hundreds of missions completed, and steady accumulation of service that demonstrated the Pearl Harbor attack, while devastating, was not decisive. The prune barge that started war on the harbor bottom finished it bombarding Japan itself. The journey from Pearl Harbor mud to Japanese coast, embodying the arc of American naval recovery and the transformation of disaster into victory through industrial capacity, technical competence, and refusal to accept defeat as permanent. Sunken ships could be raised, obsolete designs could be modernized, and revenge could be delivered by the same battleships the enemy thought it had destroyed. Proving that writing off American capacity for recovery was the fundamental error that Japan made when it chose to start a war it could not finish.